continue on our theme of let us run. In Hebrews chapter 12, we read these words. It says, therefore, since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders us and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Let us run. This is going to be our theme for a little while. In a couple of weeks' time, we're going to be doing a vision renew, and we're going to be sharing about our vision. And what we want to do is we just want to run through 2022. We talked last week about running free, running with freedom. You remember we had Forrest Gump up, run, Forrest, run. And some of us, I believe, are stuck and inhibited and unable to run. Christians I'm talking to, you're a Christian, you're saved, you're coming to church, but you're not running free. You're not running with the freedom that God has given you, that God has placed upon you, that God has birthed within you. And I just believe there should be more freedom in our lives and in our walk with God and in our Christian lives and our walk on this earth. And so I have this picture of this horse that is bridled and got the stirrups on, and it's about to go into a race, and it's stuck, and it's being steered by a jockey wherever the jockey is taking it. And sometimes that can be like us, going through life and being steered in a way that we don't want to go. And so I'm encouraging us to run through 2022, but I've got this other image of this horse that's running wild and running free, and roaming fields and over the mountains and going where it wants to go. And that should be us as Christians. That we should be running free and running wild, not inhibited, not held back, but God has called us to a life of freedom. So let us run, church. Let us run with freedom. And today I want to talk to you on run with confidence. Run with confidence. And the way we're going to approach today is a little bit different from what we normally do. And we're going to go through 1 Samuel chapter 17. It's a very well-known story of David and Goliath. This will be something that you will have learned in Sunday school if you went to Sunday school, and I'm sure you came across the story of David and Goliath. So we're going to run through 1 Samuel chapter 17 on this story, and we're going to pick out little pieces and kind of reflect on them. So 1 Samuel chapter 17 says this, now the Philistines gathered their forces for war and assembled at Succoth in Judah. They pitched camp at Ephes Dammim between Succoth and Azekah. Saul and the Israelites assembled and camped in the valley of Elah and drew up their battle line to meet the Philistines. The Philistines occupied one hill and the Israelites another, and the valley in between them. Verse 4 says, a champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. His height was about 6 cubits and a span. And he had a bronze helmet on his head, and he wore a coat of scale armor of bronze weighing about 5,000 shekels. And on his legs he wore bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels. His shield bearer went ahead of him. Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? And are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man. Let him come down to me if he is able to fight and kill me. We will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us. Then the Philistine said, this day I defy the armies of Israel. This day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other. On hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. So what we have happen here, you know the story, the history of Israel and the Philistines is that they were always at war with each other. They were enemies. And in this particular occasion, as on so many other occasions, they go to battle, they go to war against each other. And so you've got Israel, the Israelites on one side of this valley, on a hill, and on the other side of the valley, on the opposite hill, you've got the Philistines. And they had lined up ready for war, ready for battle, ready to fight each other that they had done on so many other occasions. They're suited and booted. They're ready to fight. But something different happens on this occasion where this big dude called Goliath comes out, and we're told he's about 6 cubits in a span. In today's money, whenever you do all the mathematics and you kind of get to today in feet and inches, he was huge. He was big. And he comes out from his army, from his men, steps out onto the battlefield, and he makes a declaration. First of all, he says, I'm defying the armies of Israel. I'm defying the armies of Israel. I want to push my glasses up, and I don't know why I did that. I pushed my nose. I missed my glasses and hit my nose. So he's defying the armies of Israel. This is what he's saying. And then he says, tell you what we're going to do. You send a man out who's going to fight me. Instead of everybody dying, you send a man out. The two of us are going to fight. And whoever wins, if I win, then you become our subjects. If he wins, you win, then we will become your subjects. But he says, I'm defying the armies of Israel. Goliath was a warrior, a champion, a big, big man. And it's no wonder that nobody from the Israelite army wanted to come out and wanted to fight him. They're looking at this big guy. He had a reputation, I'm sure, that preceded him, a reputation that went before him, a reputation that the Israelites would have known about. That's Goliath. He's a champion fighter. He has killed men with his bare hands. I'm not going to fight him. I'm not going to challenge him. We've got no chance against him. This warrior, this killer. But Goliath says, I'm defying the armies of Israel. And there's so much significance within that statement, because what you've got to understand in the context of the story and within the Bible is that God, Yahweh, is the God of Israel. He's the God of the Israelites. So what in effect Goliath was saying is, I'm defying this army. I'm defying you. Therefore, Goliath was defying their God also. Goliath was defying the God of Israel, whom we believe to be the one true God, the creator God, the creator of heaven and earth. He is the God of Israel, the God of the Israelites. So when Goliath defying the armies of Israel, he's also defying their God. And what I want you to know today, church, Christians, for those that stand against you, whenever they say, I'm standing against you, they may not come out in open defiance. But those who make themselves an enemy of the church, an enemy of you, they also make themselves an enemy of your God. I want you to know that today. That those who would stand against you are also then in turn standing against your God. And so Goliath saying, I'm defying the armies of Israel, was also saying, I'm defying your God. Anyone who makes themselves an enemy of you makes themselves an enemy of your God. Verse 12, let's continue on. Now David was the son of an Ephrathite named Jesse, who was from Bethlehem in Judah. Jesse had 8 sons, and in Saul's time he was very old. Jesse's 3 eldest sons had followed Saul to war. The firstborn was Eliab, the second Abinadab, and the third Shammah. David was the youngest. The 3 eldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's sheep at Bethlehem. For 40 days, the Philistine, that's Goliath, came forward every morning and evening and took his stand. 40 days, the Israelite army, the Philistines, Goliath coming out for 40 days. 40 speaks of a period of trial and of testing. For 40 days it rained on the earth while Noah was on the ark. For 40 years Moses was in the palace, and for 40 years he was in the wilderness. For 40 days Jesus was in the wilderness being tried and tested just before he started his ministry. So for 40 days, Goliath is coming out and defying the armies of Israel every morning and every evening, every night. I'm challenging someone to a fight here, and no one would stand and fight. Now Jesse, verse 17, said to his son David, take this ephah of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread for your brothers, and hurry to their camp. Take along these 10 cheeses, which includes the Dairy Lee triangles and Coleraine cheddar, to the commander of their unit. See how your brothers are, and bring back some assurance from them. They're with Saul and all the men in Israel in the valley of Elah, fighting against the Philistines. Early in the morning, David left the flock in the care of a shepherd, loaded up and set out as Jesse had directed. He reached the camp as the army was going out to its battle positions, shouting the war cry. So Jesse sends his youngest son David to the camp. He gives him bread and cheese. Go and take this to the commander, because I want a report of how my sons are doing. They're fighting, David. They're involved in a war. They're involved in a battle. They're fighting against the Philistines. And whenever David shows up, lo and behold, there's no fight taking place. The Israelites are lined up here, and the Philistines are lined up here, and there's no war taking place. David expected a war. David expected a battle. And what we're told is they lined up shouting the war cry. For 40 days, they've been coming out, and they've been shouting the war cry, but they haven't actually been entering into battle. Some people can talk a good game, can't they? Some people are very good at shouting the war cry, but not actually entering into the battle. David was expecting a war, but no one's moving. Everybody is stayed stuck in their lines, in their trenches. They're coming out and they're shouting of what they're going to do, but they don't actually take that step onto the battlefield. And sometimes we can be surrounded by people who can talk a good game. It still surprises me to this day that I talked about being in Bible college in 1998, before I was only a couple years old. And he comes out of Bible college, and he's coming up to almost 50 years in ministry. And there's still people who are saved a couple of months that know how to pastor better than what he does. They come in, Jack, you should be doing this, you should be doing this, you shouldn't be doing this. This is how you should pastor, Jack. You're only a couple of months saved. And they seem to know better than him. And some people can talk about a good game, but they've never actually done anything. We got to learn who we're going to listen to, as we're going to find out here in just a second. Continuing on at verse 21. Israel and the Philistines were drawing up their lines facing each other. David left his things with the keeper of supplies, ran to the battle lines, and asked his brothers how they were doing. As he was talking to them, Goliath the Philistine, the champion from Gath, stepped out from his lines and shouted his usual defiance. And David heard it. Verse 24, whenever the Israelites saw the man, they all fled from him in great fear. When the Israelites saw him, they fled in him from great fear. David's expecting this war, this battle. No one's fighting. They are afraid. They're fleeing. They're hiding in fear of Goliath. And we're about to see the difference between David and the armies, between David and his brothers. My question today is, who are you going to be? Are you going to be David? Or are you going to be one of the other soldiers in this army who live in fear, who flee, who stay in the trenches, who talk a good game but don't actually step out? Now, the Israelites had been saying, do you see how this man keeps coming out? So they're now talking to David, explaining to David what's going on. He comes out to defy Israel. The king will give great wealth to the man who kills him. He will also give him his daughter in marriage and will exempt his family from taxes in Israel. David asked the men standing near him, what will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? This is the response of David. There's a boldness and a confidence rising up in David. Who does he think he is to stand there and to openly defy the armies of Israel, to openly defy our God? David knew where his confidence lay. And his confidence lay in the God that he worshipped and in the God that he served, and the one true God, Yahweh. That's where his confidence was. So whenever David sees this Goliath, this champion, this killer, this man who is openly defying an enemy of us, who does he think he is? My God's greater than what is before us. David understood who was on their side and whose side they were on. He understood that to defy the army of Israel was to defy the God of Israel. And this is where David's confidence lies. Verse 27, let's continue on. They repeated to him, this is the other soldiers in the army, what they had been saying, and told him, this is what will be done for the man who kills him. When Eliab, this is his brother, his eldest brother, heard him speaking with the men, he burned with anger at him. His brother, angry at David for asking the questions, what's going on here? What will be done for the man that's going to attack Goliath and that's going to kill him? And Eliab, his older brother, burns with anger at him and asks, why have you come down here? With whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch the battle. Now what have I done? David asks. Can't they even speak? He then turned away to someone else and brought up the same matter. And the men answered him as before. What David said was overheard and reported to Saul, and Saul sent for him. So what's going on is that there's nobody stepping up There's nobody stepping out, and David's questioning, why is there nobody stepping out? Who does he think he is that he's going to defy us? Our God? That's not on. What's going to be done for the man that steps up and it kills this giant, this Goliath? What's going to be done for him? And then Eliab overhears, what's he talking about? What's he talking to those guys about? What's he interested for? And then he burns with anger at David. What are you doing here, David? Who did you leave those few sheep with? You're just a shepherd boy, David. And in asking that question, Eliab didn't care about the sheep. Who did you leave those few sheep with? Eliab is being condescending towards David. He's beginning to put him down. That doesn't deter the confidence and the boldness that David has within him, because David knew his God. David knew the God that he served and the God that he worshipped. And there will be voices that will come against you. And sometimes it will be people who are closest to you. But there will be voices that will come against you. Who do you think you are to step out there? Who do you think you are to preach? Who do you think you are to lead worship? Who do you think you are to be on a worship team? Who do you think you are to be a Christian? And sometimes that voice, who do you think you are, is actually our own. Sometimes we speak to ourselves in a negative and condescending way. I can't. I'm not good enough. And we fail to run free and run wild. And we fail to run with confidence and with boldness. Whose voice are you listening to in your life today? Whose voice are you listening to in your walk in this life or in your walk with God? David had to put those voices, his eldest brother. Who do you think you are, David? Way back to the sheep. Eliab, one of those who was talking a good game but who wouldn't step up. And this didn't stop David. Don't let those voices stop you. Verse 32, let's continue on. David said to Saul, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." Saul replied, "You're not able to go out against the Philistine and fight him. You're only a young man, and he has been a warrior from his youth." Again, another negative voice. You've got his eldest brother speaking negativity over him. Now you've got the king, King Saul. You're just a boy. He's big. He's been fighting from he's been a young man. Negative voices. But look at David's response. In verse 34, David responds and says to Saul, "Your servant," David, he's talking about himself, "has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it down, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant David has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine." Saul said to David, "Go, the Lord be with you." David is drawing on experiences of life that no one knew about. You know what, Saul? I've been looking after sheep. And while I've been a shepherd and out in the fields looking after these sheep, my sheep got attacked by a lion. It carried off a sheep in its mouth, and I chased after the lion. A lot of people would I'm not going after it that way. It's just one sheep. And David pursues the lion, grabs it by the hair, and kills it. This boy that was overlooked by his father whenever Samuel the prophet comes to anoint one of them as king. Same with a bear, killing lions and bears, and nobody knew about it. Nobody knew. David knew what he had been through, and he's drawing on his experiences that no one else knew about. And sometimes we will walk through difficult moments, challenges by ourselves. Sometimes we'll walk through battlefields by ourselves that no one knows about. But God knows, and God was with us. There will actually be moments when you will need to walk alone. There will be moments where you will need to face challenges alone. But you need to know that God is with you. You may not have an army behind you or an army beside you. You may be walking through a valley by yourself, but you need to know today that God is with you. And David understood this. David knew this. While I was fighting the bear and fighting the lion, God delivered me. And if God delivered me from that, you can be sure I'm not going to fall dead at the hands of this uncircumcised Philistine. God's brought me this far. He's going to bring me further. God hasn't brought me through all of this just to leave me here by the wayside. God is never going to leave me. God is never going to forsake me. He's brought me this far. You can be sure, King Saul, he's going to bring me through this. Draw on your experiences. What has God brought you through? God hasn't brought you this far just to leave you and just to let you be. Verse 38, then Saul dressed David in his own tunic. He put a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his head, and David fastened on a sword over the tunic and tried walking around because he was not used to them. Cannot go on these, he said to Saul, because I'm not used to them. So he took them off. He took them off. Again, the voices will say, you've got to do it this way. You've got to do it that way, and you're doing it wrong. You can't do this, you can't do that. They haven't walked your journey. They haven't been with you whenever you've had to fight the bear and had to fight the lion. And then when it comes to a moment where it's a bit more public, then you will have people and voices, this is the way you've got to do it, Jack. This is the way it's got to be done. Oh, you can't do it that way. No. And all these voices that haven't walked your journey will try to influence and tell you how it should be done and try to dress you in their armor and their tunic and their sword and their spear. And it's theirs. If you're going to walk out the call of God in your life, then you've got to walk out the call of God in your life. It's your journey, it's your walk, it's your path. You walk it. David took it off. What have you got to take off? What have you got to let go of? What have you got to throw down? Verse 40, then he took a staff in his hand, chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag and his sling in his hand, and approached the Philistine. This is the moment. All of these men have all had their opportunity. And I can imagine them watching little David walking onto the battlefield to go and face Goliath. And every single one of them, what's going on here? Is Saul serious? Is David serious? Is this who we're putting our hope in? David approaches the Philistine. Verse 41, meanwhile, the Philistine with his shield bearer in front of him kept coming closer to David. He looked David over and saw that he was a little more than a boy, glowing with health and handsome, and he despised him. He said to David, am I a dog that you come at me with sticks? The Philistine cursed David by his gods. Come here, he said, I will give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals. David's response to the Philistine, you come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. Remember, this is what Goliath did. I'm defying the armies of Israel. And David knows you can't do that. Do you not know who our God is? Do you not know who we are? And your open defiance of us is an open defiance of our God. Verse 46, David continues and he says, this day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. You gotta love the Bible, don't you? This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord, and he will give all of you into our hands. As the Philistine moved closer to it, sometimes that's the way we got to talk. Not like literally to people, on Facebook or whatever, but sometimes I tell you there's a spiritual battle going on. And what we're about to find out here is that we all have Goliaths to face. And sometimes that's how we've got to speak to our Goliath, speak at our Goliath. Instead of hiding away in fear, you've got to, you know what, I'm going to cut off your head and I'm going to feed your flesh to the birds. Verse 48, as the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly towards the battle line to meet him. David ran towards his Goliath. David faced his Goliath head on. He didn't hide away in the shadows. He didn't hide in the trenches. He stepped out onto the battlefield and he ran with confidence and with boldness towards his Goliath. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and he struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead and he fell face down onto the ground. Well, because one young man stepped out. Every one of us will come to a Goliath moment in our lives. It's a moment where we choose to stay or to step out and to step forward. This was a crossroads moment for David, and there will be Goliath moments in your life that they are crossroads moments. You see, your growth as a Christian, your moving forward, your development as a Christian, as a son and a daughter of God, your development and your growth will be determined upon your ability and your willingness to step out and fight. It's not determined upon how many times you come to church on a Sunday and how well you are at singing and lifting up your hands. It's, can you fight your Goliath? Can you fight that which is coming against you? Do you have enough fight in you? Do you have enough fight in you against yourself and your own voice, your own condescending, negative voice? David ran towards Goliath with boldness, with confidence. And this was a moment, this was the point in cutting off and defeating Goliath and cutting off his head, as we're about to read here, and bringing it to Saul, the head of Goliath. But that was the moment that changed David's life. You see, if David had came to the battlefield as he was sent by his father, go and bring me a report, because Jesse wanted to know, because Jesse wasn't hearing stuff. He wasn't hearing what was going on the battlefield, and Jesse's thinking, my sons could be dead because they're involved in a battle. That couldn't be more further from the truth, because they hadn't stepped out onto the battlefield. And David could have easily said, well, you know what, it's not my fight. It's not my battle. Nobody else is stepping out, so why should I? Sometimes we draw down to the lowest common denominator of life. Well, no one else is doing it, so why should I? That person turns up late, so I might as well turn up late. That person doesn't do anything, so why should I do anything? That person doesn't help, so why should I help? And we draw down to the lowest common denominator. When really, as a Christian, we're living our lives for God, so we should be rising up. Everything that we do should be an act of worship to God, done to the best of our ability. Whatever it is, doesn't matter. We should be lifting ourselves up and elevating as an act of worship towards God. And David knew. I think this was also about identity. And this is something I think, I believe so strongly in, because there has been a loss of identity, an attack on identity. And we can read about it so often throughout the Bible. Maybe we'll talk about this again at some point. But an attack on our identity. And you've got to know, David knew, if you're defying the armies, then you're defying our God. David's identity was in God. Was in the God that he worshipped, the God that he served. The God that had brought him through those moments and delivering him from the bear and from the lion. And there will come moments when other people, when a majority will stay on the battle line, will talk a good talk, will shout the war cry, but won't actually step out. The majority of the men stayed in the battle line, and only David stepped out. A majority of the men stayed on the boat, and only Peter stepped out of the boat. And whenever it comes to stepping out and stepping up and stepping forward for God, you will be the only one. You will step out alone, but you will step out, I pray, with the boldness of God and with the boldness of the Holy Spirit. This is what set the apostles apart. They were filled with the boldness of the Holy Spirit. Whenever you read through the book of Acts about the apostles preaching, Peter, James, John, and going to the temple, and the apostle Paul, and whenever they're preaching, it says they spoke with boldness. With the boldness of the Holy Spirit. And I pray that there will be a Holy Spirit boldness that will rise up in this place. A Holy Spirit boldness that will rise up in you, that you will draw on. Your confidence will be drawn from that relationship with God. That a Holy Ghost boldness will rise up within you. And what happened in this moment took David from the fields, looking after those few sheep, as Eliab said, and brought him to the palace. Whenever you defeat your Goliath, it will take you up a stage. It will take you up a level. It will take you to the next stage of your journey. What are you going to do, church? Are you going to stay on the lines, stay behind the lines? Well, I'm not going to go fight him. Are you going to stay where it's comfortable and where it's safe? Or are you going to move forward to where God has called you to be? Because beyond Goliath lies your destiny. Beyond Goliath lies your future. You have the same God that David had. David's response: you come against me with sword and javelin, I come against you in the name of my God. Confidence makes all the difference. Confidence makes all the difference. You research sports psychology and things like that. Is it confidence makes all the difference whenever you're on the football pitch, whenever you're running, whatever it is. I used to love watching Usain Bolt. See, just doing his warm-ups. You talk about a man with confidence. It wasn't arrogance, it was confidence. And all the other runners are lined up, and I think they're already defeated before the gun gets shot. Before they're lined up along the line, they're standing there and they're taking off their tracksuits, and they're focused. They're focused on the finish line, and they're shaking their legs off, and they're doing their stretches. Used to do that when I was 22. I reached my toes, not anymore. And they're psyched up and they're ready to go. And you see him Bolt, he's giving high fives to everybody else, and he's walking around and he's dancing because he's got so much confidence that he's going to win. I think that's got to be us, church. Having a confidence, you know what? My God watches over me. My God goes before me. That's what we've been singing about. My God goes before me. He goes behind me. He goes either side of me. I'm surrounded by the presence of God. Therefore, I can stand with boldness. Therefore, I can walk with confidence. You come against me, you want to say something against me, then you're saying it against the God who watches over me. You make yourself an enemy of me, then you make yourself an enemy of my God, and he's watching over me. You got to have confidence and boldness and run towards your Goliath. Let me finish with this here, and we'll maybe pick up on this at some point. Before we go into the dedication, we sang a song at the start there, Abba. God is our Father, and there's these lines in it that talks about the Father running to us down this prodigal way. And in Luke chapter 15, one of my most favorite chapters, one of my most favorite verses, most favorite stories in the Bible, the story of the prodigal son. And I've preached on it many, many times and absolutely love it. Because as the prodigal son comes back to the father's house, he makes a decision: I'm going back to my father's house. The one who walked in relationship in the home of the father, who walked away, who left, but then said, I'm going back to my father's house. What we read in that story in Luke chapter 15 is the father runs to the son. The father runs to the son. And in Jesus telling that story and in sharing that the father running, this man is running, was actually, men didn't run in those days. You weren't allowed to run. And in Jesus telling that story, he's running to the son. The listeners, the Pharisees, the religious folk would have been freaked out at the fact that this man is running. But the father runs to the son, throws his arm around him, puts a ring on his finger, gets him a robe, and has a party for him. Boris Johnson organized it. It was good. It was a good party. And that's a picture of God who runs towards us with confidence. And if you're here today and maybe you're not a Christian, I don't know where you're at with God, I want to tell you that there is a God who runs after you. There is a God who pursues you. And every single person that's here who's already a Christian, who's a follower of Jesus, who is a son, a daughter of God, they will understand that God pursued them. God has pursued us. We go through life running after different things. And sometimes running away from stuff. You want to know why a lot of people spend their weekends getting drunk and smoking blow and taking drugs? It's because they're running away from stuff. That's the long and short of it. Oh, we're having a party. No, you're running away from some stuff. There's Goliaths in your life that you're not facing. That it's easier to sit in the trenches. And by sitting in the trenches, I mean it's easier just to numb the pain at the bottom of an alcohol bottle, at the end of a joint, at the end of a line of cocaine, because that means I don't have to deal with my Goliath. And I want to urge you today, whoever you are, whatever you're doing in your life, stop running away, stop hiding, and begin to run towards the one person who can fix everything. The one person who will be with you in facing your Goliath. He will walk with you. He will go before you. He will go alongside you. He will go behind you. He is with you.